What would you say to those founders or those people that think that another blue term will be a headwind for crypto in the US and not a tailwind?
Let's give her a chance. She's got 50 days into the nominee. She had a successful debate. She's out there campaigning. She's raised a lot of money. I'm talking to her team. Other members of the industry are talking to her team. I think we're going to get there. And I think if we get there, man, how wouldn't that be great?
You're listening to Because of Bitcoin, a podcast that shares the personal stories of how Bitcoin is having a real impact in people's lives, including mine. I'm your host, Mauricio Di Bartolomeo, the co-founder and CSO of Let It. And without further ado, let's get started with today's story. Hello, friends, and welcome back to Because of Bitcoin. With a pivotal US election just weeks away, the stakes for Bitcoin and digital asset adoption have never been higher. The outcome of this election could reshape our industry and your investments, and that's not an exaggeration. Both candidates have radically different platforms on crypto, and we're here to illuminate those differences. In our first episode, we spoke with David Bailey, who has helped shape the Bitcoin policy in Donald Trump's camp, giving us insights into the red perspective. Today, we turn to an influential voice in the Democratic camp, Anthony Scaramucci. Once a staunch Trump supporter and former press secretary, he's now fully backing Kamala Harris and working to craft a robust platform for Bitcoin and digital assets. Anthony is well-versed in both Wall Street and Washington, and his views are informed by a wealth of experience. He believes that it's time for Bitcoiners to, quote, give Kamala a shot. And in today's episode, he'll explain why that matters. This conversation is one of the most insightful ones I've had so far, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Anthony Scaramucci. Thank you very much, Anthony, for taking the time and for being here, fresh off what was a pivotal presidential debate where you played a key role. And we're going to get to all that. But before we go into your career in politics and your view on the US election and how this plays out, I do want to ask you a few things about your Bitcoin journey. And you first disclosed that you first publicly disclosed your interest in Bitcoin in 2017. And I wanted to know, who was it that put Bitcoin on your radar? And what was your process to determine Bitcoin had staying power?
So first of all, thank you for having me. And secondly, it's such a good question. The short answer to the whole thing is that I had met some Fed people that were talking about the digitization of the US dollar in 2017. And then when I got fired from the White House, I said, okay, I'm going to buy the URL skybridgebitcoin.com, which I did. And then I said, we have to think about and how to get involved with Bitcoin. But I was afraid and I didn't really understand it 100%. And I was afraid I was going to be embarrassed. And a lot of people told me it was worthless and so on and so forth. And the more homework you do on Bitcoin, the more comfortable you get. And so that's what happened to me. I got very comfortable. And then I started making investments in October of 2020, about 2 months after the legendary Michael Saylor made his investments. Michael and I are very close friends. He's writing the foreword to my new book. He's a lovely guy. And we're grateful to have him in this industry, by the way, So, but, listen, here's the thing I would say to you. If you had said to me when I made my first Bitcoin investment, where would Bitcoin be today? I bought Bitcoin between 10 and 16,000. And I would have said, okay, Bitcoin will be 25, 30,000. I didn't think we would have a 69,000, 17,000, 60,000. I didn't think that was going to happen. So Bitcoin is one of those things that, Mauricio, as you know, you can never predict what the hell is going to happen. Do you know what I mean?
No, and I love one of the points you made in one of the podcasts is that time in the market, like you describe the S&P this way as a jagged line up and to the right. And that's why it pays to stay in the market and to not leave the market because you may lose the sort of top 10 best performing days and you're basically out in square one. So I love your idea of a long-term approach, which is, I think, what your funds have done so well, outside of Bitcoin and in Bitcoin, just because of your long-term thesis. And it took you, like you said, it was a bit of a 3-year journey between the moment you first expressed your interest in Bitcoin until you made your first purchase for the fund. Did you have to lay the foundation to your investors that you were going to buy Bitcoin, or you just bought Bitcoin? You asked for forgiveness instead of permission.
Yeah, exactly. I bought Bitcoin. I happily explained it to clients. We did a few seminars as to why we bought Bitcoin. But I just thought it was a good idea to buy Bitcoin. I just said, okay, we're buying it, and here's why we're buying it. And some people were very unhappy with us when we bought it, and some people were happy with us. And it's one of those things where you're not going to make everybody happy unless they're making money. So it shot up, Mauricio, and then we're like, oh, everyone was very happy. I'm a genius. And then it crashed, and everyone was like, oh, you suck. You're a dummy. And if they just stayed patient, they would have been really, really well served by Bitcoin.
100%. I think this industry depends on when you look at it. Throughout the process of building Ledden, we've been called visionaries and lunatics, and back to visionaries and back to lunatics, and now we're back to visionaries. But I think it's just to your point about when you have conviction, just stay in the trade, and if it goes your way, then you'll do really, really well just to stay in the market.
Yes, exactly.
One comment you made recently, which I thought was fascinating, earlier this year, you said, I live in a world of 60-year-old, mostly white males, and they hate you guys. They hate me for sure, but they also hate you guys because they've missed it. And
right. Yeah, 100%. Well, that's true.
Yeah, I think we've all missed Bitcoin to a point, right? Depending on where you come into the trade. And to build on that, I think most people miss the early innings of most transformational investments. And that sort of missing that investment creates this idea, generally speaking, it creates a sense of fear of missing out, this FOMO, and not necessarily hate per se. Could you elaborate on that phrase about hate? Do you think this is just a symptom of where these people are in the learning curve, or are we just never going to get a segment of population or those people on board with Bitcoin?
It's a really good question. So I think BlackRock and Fidelity changed everything. And I think these are two of the largest asset managers in the world. They both have positive dispositions towards Bitcoin. And BlackRock is arguably, when you think of the quintessential institutional money manager, you think of BlackRock. And so to me, I sort of think that they're the gold standard, if you will. And they've said it's okay. Fidelity says it's okay. So it's going to be slow. It's not going to happen as quickly as the Bitcoiners want, but it's ramping. And while it's ramping, you've got this engine of retail investing, right? And so what I would say to people is Wall Street's a big selling machine. I've been on Wall Street for almost 40 years now. It rockets up, it sells. And so you'll get the contemporaneous 11 ETFs selling the idea of Bitcoin to whoever their customers are and clients. You'll get Michael Saylor, who's his own ETF, basically. He's just bought another $1.1 billion of Bitcoin today, I think, or yesterday. And so this sort of stuff will propel. And then eventually some consultant will say, geez, we're underinvested in this asset class. It's like gold. You should have a 1%, 2%, 3% position in the asset class.
Yeah, I mean, I completely get I agree with what you said. BlackRock, we just did an event in Mexico City where we had a bunch of speakers from BlackRock, and we've had a chance to interact with them, and they get it. I was very happily surprised to see how well educated they are and how pro Bitcoin and they have a very long-term view on this asset. This is not an overnight thing. This took a lot of deliberation internally, and they seem to be fully on board. Or committed, I guess, to it. So to your point, I'm excited to see what that selling machine does. Another point that you've said, which I thought was fascinating, was you've said that meme coins are radioactive. And I would love if you could expand on that. And if you could share, do you have, I guess, a short list of what you consider to be the legitimate crypto assets? Curious on how you draw that line and how you articulate that difference.
I think Avalanche is a great asset. I think Polkadot is a great asset. Solana is a great asset. Obviously, Ethereum is a great asset. This Telegram, I think, is a great asset. And so I know he's in trouble. I know he got indicted or whatever it was, arrested in France, but he's got, hundreds of millions of users. And I think he can start creating a super app like capability there. And, WeChat is obviously supervised by the Chinese government. Probably Western governments are going to want some supervision over Telegram. And I don't think that's going to be terrible for Telegram to do that. But, for me, my two big assets are Bitcoin and Solana. So I probably have 55% of my net worth in Bitcoin. I have a big position in Solana. And I have a couple of pieces of real estate. And of course I have my fund. And again, when I talk about the money I have in my fund and I look at, 60% of my fund is in hedge funds, but about 40% of my fund is in cryptocurrency assets. And so most of that's Bitcoin. So that's where I come up with my net worth estimate.
That's fascinating and really interesting to see your take on.
By the way, Mauricio, the hair looks fucking great. Just so I would point out, because fellow Italian, right?
Absolutely,
you're Italian, right?
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Claro. I parlo un po', ma non è, my main language is Spanish because I grew up in Venezuela, but my parents are Italian. They live in Italy. Actually, they've retired.
Right, but I'm just letting you know. I may have to get hair product referrals from you. Hair looks great. All right, keep going.
We'll chat in Singapore. Before we get into the upcoming election, which we're definitely going to get into for a minute, you are active. You are obviously one of the best investors on Wall Street. You are very active in politics, and you understand the opportunity in digital assets that's in front of us. How do you feel the current administration has handled regulation around digital assets?
Well, it's a letter grade F. I mean, the current administration has been a nightmare for the industry. The worst SEC commissioner in the history of the SEC is Gary Gensler. Perhaps the worst public servant I've ever encountered is Elizabeth Warren. She says she's a progressive, but she's actually a regressive. She's bad for business. She's bad for our industry. She's bad for other industries. She's about control. America is not about that. America is about freedom and opportunity. Gary Gensler, I don't get the guy. He knows better. But I think this has been a disaster for the two of them. I think they've embarrassed themselves on the world stage. They've lost court cases. They've been rebuked by judges. They lost the Ripple case. They lost the Grayscale case. They're about to lose the Coinbase case. They prosecuted Jesse at Kraken. He paid a $30 million fine. Now they're prosecuting him again. It's a relentless, ridiculous story. And I find it reprehensible.
Because you're an outspoken supporter of Kamala Harris and the Democratic ticket. And I find it very refreshing when you can find a voice of sanity or criticism internally with right intentions, right? Because I believe, like many others, you're trying to you want to help them get it right. And, politics being such a complex and broad-reaching topic, you won't get everything right. So I think it's really about getting the right people in the right room so that we can correct it. And ideally, get bipartisan support, because the way we all win is not for this to be a one-party thing. When a government or any country gets entrenched in one party and you just build the country around what that party wants, you by default isolate a big segment of the population. So I want to get into the whole how could we get bipartisan support, because you have been you're a unique character in that you've been an outspoken supporter of Trump. You've worked briefly for his administration. Now you've switched sides and you're basically a big supporter and a vocal critic of the Trump campaign. You've said yourself that Trump is a very smart politician. And one of the things I think he's done as a smart politician is he's jumped on this Bitcoin train. And he has been very successful at rallying support from the industry, both on the voting-based side and on the fundraising side. So on the other side, you got the Democratic campaign still trying to shake off this idea of this anti-crypto army. So how do you think this plays out in the election? And what can we do as an industry to get bipartisan support for sensible regulation, regardless of who we get in office?
I mean, these are all great questions. So let me just start with the first thing. I was a lifelong Republican. So if you think of Mitt Romney or Liz Cheney or Dick Cheney or George Bush or George Bush's dad, Ronald Reagan, I spent my entire life as an adult as a Republican. I'm still registered as a Republican. When Donald Trump won, and I did support him after Jeb came out of the race. So I was with the mainstream, middle of the road Republican, and then I switched over to Trump. I was expecting a different sort of a presidency. Now, people have been critical of me, people that dislike Trump, they'll say, well, you should have known better. He had this record, he had that record, he had said this about Mexicans, and you remember all of the derogatory remarks that he was making. And I made a mistake. I did what's called cognitive dissonance. I toned down in my mind the things he was saying that I disliked, and I ratcheted up the things in my mind that I liked. And so he won. I went to go work for him. It was ill-fated. I got fired after 11 days. We were fighting in the White House. It was his right to fire me, so he did. I stayed loyal to him for 2 years. My attitude was I'm a lifelong Republican, don't like everything he's saying, but I can deal with it. We've only got two choices, Democrats and Republicans. I'll stick with him. And the goalpost kept moving. And he kept saying worse and worse things and doing worse and worse things and more racism, more heat, more obnoxiousness. He finally, I think the tipping point for me was he said that the African-American women in the Congress, there were 4 of them, known as the Squad, they should go back to the countries they originally came from. Well, 3 of them had been born in the United States and one was a naturalized citizen. And I said on television that was a form of racism. It was a form of nativism, and he should stop speaking like that. At which point he attacked me on Twitter. That's his right. And so that was okay with that. And then of course, I'm a New Yorker, so I fired back. I think I called him the fattest president since William Howard Taft or something like that. And then the fight started, but then it became clear the guy was reckless, and he was going to attack me, someone that was supporting him, even though he fired me. He would eventually turn on the country. He's a reckless sort of Donald Trump, universe of Trump, a team of one, a universe of one. And then, of course, as I predicted, he mishandled things. He totally mishandled the pandemic. I supported Joe Biden last time. I was supporting Joe Biden this time before he dropped out of the race. And this is really just a binary choice. And I would say to people, who could make the society worse? And I think that the answer to that is an easy answer. Donald Trump could make the society worse. And I don't want to make the society worse. Who can make the society better? I think that the truth about that is we have to make the society better. I don't think any one politician can make it better, but if you're going to change the abortion laws, if you're going to try to deport 11 to 15 million immigrants, or if you think that makes sense for people, I don't. I think that would be a disaster for the country. I certainly don't want that to happen. And I could list for you, Mauricio, all these different things. So I changed my position. I see her as a good person. I see her as somebody that cares about people. I see her as somebody that's going to do some things that I don't necessarily like. But I think in general, she's going to get the economy right. In general, she's going to get our national security footprint right. And he's talking about a post-constitutional America. He's talking about ripping up our Constitution and changing things to make it reflect Trump's values as opposed to the 250-year heritage and tradition of the United States. So for all those reasons, I choose to be a patriot first and then a partisan second. So I've helped the vice president. I was flattered to be asked to go down there to help her at the debate. That was a lot of fun for me. I enjoyed that. I hope I'll get another opportunity to do that. And I'm also been participant with Mark Cuban and Michael Novogratz and others on the bipartisan commitment to crypto. And so I will just say this. I'll finish by saying this. We need bipartisan crypto policy in the United States. We don't want it to be one-sided. And so if she should win the presidency, you're going to need people like me to make that work.
I 100% agree. And if I could choose one Sherpa to guide the Democratic Party to the right policies in Bitcoin and crypto, I think you're the man. And so I hope that they recognize this as well as all of us do. And like you said, I share this desire to get bipartisan support for this industry because nothing really becomes long-term if it's a one-party issue. And on the topic of rewriting the Constitution, I'm from Venezuela. As you know, one of the first things Chavez did when he got in was to rewrite the Constitution. And I share that to all of my friends and acquaintances as the number one red flag on when to run away from a particular country or form of government is when somebody comes in and with a populist agenda and tries to rewrite the Constitution. So that to me is a very scary thing. Going to the debate, you mentioned in your recent podcast that you were surprised and you spoke very highly about the level of efficiency and organization that the Democratic team had in this debate, going from, pre-debate TV hits on swing states, clear talking points. It sounds like they have it together. So my question to you is, why have they had such a challenge getting crypto right? Are they looking for guidance on this? Are they actively trying to reformulate or rebuild this plan to get some buying from the industry?
I am thinking about it. They are very well organized. The younger people like crypto. The older people in the party don't like crypto. I would say there's a tug of war going on. And I would say that if she wins and she can move herself away from Elizabeth Warren, the younger people like Ro Khanna are pro-crypto. And I think we'll get positive and pro-crypto legislation. What my contemporaries and my fellow members of the crypto industry are concerned about is that the win happens, she wins, and then the beatings continue until morale improves. You've heard that expression before, and they double and triple down on crypto and they try to kick it out of the United States, at which point that would diminish U.S. presence of crypto. Intellectual capital would leave, people would leave, capital would leave the United States. But something tells me that that's not going to happen, because I have worked in politics. I have a little bit of an experience, bad experience, by the way, in politics. I got fired abruptly after 11 days. But I understand these people, and the money is flowing from the crypto industry. The money is coming into it. And I would say the same thing that happened to Uber. Nobody wanted Uber, but the people wanted Uber, and the people want crypto. So my guess is everyone's going to wake up and we'll have a bipartisan commitment to crypto on a going forward basis.
I want to see that future as well. And I think that your answer dovetails really nicely into my next question, which is, I speak to a lot of founders and investors in this space, and lots of people in our industry have expressed fear over what a new Democratic term could do to their plans for the US market. And you're seeing traditional media and others sort of tag this idea that Trump is the pro-crypto or pro-Bitcoin trade and the blues are the anti-crypto trade. So one is a tailwind and one is a headwind. What would you say to those founders or those people that think that another blue term will be a headwind for crypto in the US and not a tailwind?
Yeah, I think what I would say to them is let's give her a chance. She's got 50 days into the nominee. She had a successful debate. She's out there campaigning. She's raised a lot of money. I'm talking to her team. Other members of the industry are talking to her team. I think we're going to get there. And I think if we get there, man, how wouldn't that be great? Republicans and Democrats like it. And then we take off the table the potential partisan fight over something that's so important to the American economy. So I would say give her a chance. I don't see apocalypse for the industry. I'm not going to say that she's going to be super for the industry yet either, because I'm not sure. But I can say this: Donald Trump's a very transactional guy. So he's with you today. He may or may not be with you tomorrow. I think you got to be careful when you're assessing and analyzing these things.
That's very fair. We're going to get into the new DeFi project that was just announced, which I would love to get your take on that from the Trump camp. Now, in the Tales from the Crypto podcast, you said something that stuck with me, which is that you got into politics because it was good for business. And I'm from Venezuela, and I actually had the opposite experience. My experience was that when you got into politics and when you picked a side, in a long enough time frame, someone was going to come in that basically you're either tied to what's in power or what's not. So you either had friends or enemies, and there was nowhere in the middle. So what would you say to a founder or a business leader that is basically thinking about how to manage politics and business?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. And so I would say in Venezuela, it seemed like a little bit harsher. It felt like they were building jail cells for each other. So one party won, the other party built a jail cell, and vice versa. In the United States, there was some level of cooperation. And so you could be a Reagan Republican and still have a good relationship with Democrats and vice versa. Trump turned that. Trump has made it a little bit more partisan. Maybe social media has made it a little bit more partisan. But, when I was supporting Republican Party candidates in the 90s and the 10s, the zeros and the 10s, it was pretty good. There was nobody was bothering me, and I was with this guy. That's fine. I even got invited to Democratic Party meetings and things like that. I think it's a lot more divisive today. And so it's probably more like Venezuela today than it was back then. And I would say that politics for 30 years didn't hurt me. But then it did hurt me. I took a step too far, frankly. I went into the administration. If I didn't go into the administration, probably would have been fine. But I went into the administration. My abrupt firing also raised my profile. But it gave me an ability to do more with a higher profile. I don't think I could be as big of a political advocate today or even an advocate for the crypto industry if I didn't become more well-known as a result of that situation that took place in Washington. So for me, you get, this is a big lesson for young people listening to your podcast. You get positives and negatives from bad experiences. When I got fired, it was humiliating. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But it also had this silver lining where I ended up meeting so many more people that I would have never met had I not been fired. So that's how it goes. And you have to stay in things and not let yourself get shaken out of something.
That's super insightful. And I'm sure people listening are going to really appreciate especially coming from you. Now, I agree with you. Just based as an observant or an observer, I do think that my sense is that Trump and the Trump camp has they're pretty savvy political instincts. Like they're pretty attuned to sort of the political environment in the US. And he has done some policies that resonate with Bitcoiners, like announcing the strategic reserve, like, freeing Russ Ulbricht on day one. Now, on the other hand, he's also just announced this World Liberty Financial thing, which is some sort of DeFi protocol where he's, quote, embracing the future with crypto and leaving the old financial system behind. Now, we've seen this movie before, big personalities, DeFi protocols, what could possibly go wrong? As someone that's worked in the administration, what do you think the goal is with this? To me, it feels a little bit like a political stint for them to make it harder on the Democrats to voice support for crypto as he keeps getting more and more involved. So what would be your take on this?
Again, you're asking really, really good questions. So I guess what I want to think about how to say this to you. The reason I'm hesitating is that these things are so complex. Okay. So, $5.6 billion has been stolen from people this year, according to the FBI, as a result of crypto scams. Now, most of these crypto scams affect the elderly. And so, one side of me is like, okay, wow, we got to really crack down on that. We got to really watch over that. The other part of me is people like Coinbase and Kraken aren't doing that, and so then we have to figure out a way to praise the good actors. We have to figure out a way to have the good actors help us regulate and be on watch for the bad actors. And we have to figure out a way to get the messaging right with the politicians. If I look back, I don't think I've ever said this before in anybody's podcast, but I'll share it with you. I think Warren and Gensler were too close to Sam Bankman-Fried. And I think ultimately they had hundreds of soft conversations among aides, and they had several meetings together. Some of those meetings, frankly, weren't even documented because they were outside of the office. And I think Sam was close to getting a margin agreement on his exchange, similar to the New York Stock Exchange and the CME. And then he was abruptly found out to be a fraud. And so in order to get the spotlight away from yourself, Gensler and Warren, they went full hog and had the pendulum swing totally to the right with super aggressive anti-crypto. In this way, they could take cover in what they were about to do to help Sam. They were close to Sam's parents. They liked Sam. Sam was a golden child. And so the weird thing about this isn't even based on economic sense. It's not even based on what's right for the country, but it was based on saving their own personal asses.
Wow. You see me nodding because now I get it. It's just like you connected the dots and it makes so much sense.
Yeah. I mean, I really think that's what happened,
That's fascinating. And you know what? You're reading my mind because that dovetails really nicely into my next question, which is on the same Tales from the Crypto podcast, which, by the way, whoever hasn't listened to this, go listen to this. This is an amazing, amazing podcast. It's so well produced. It's full of insights. On this podcast, in the first episode, you said that you were absolutely certain that bad things could not happen to FTX. And that was precisely where the risk was coming from. The risk comes from the places that you would never expect or the things that you just weren't really even looking at. Now, this might be a loaded question, but what would you have done differently if you went back in time? And the second one is, if you were here today and somebody was diligencing a platform to trust with their assets, what would you recommend to these people?
I mean, you're asking such good questions. So going back in time, I would tell people that you have to follow the money. And I think he had 4 people that were in control of the money. I didn't understand that. The VCs didn't understand that. And you need to make sure that there's more people in control of the money. So I needed to get in front of all of senior leadership. Do you control the money? Do you control the money? Who controls the money? And when we realized it was only a couple of people, then he said, okay, that's no good. I got to get out of this thing. So that was a big learning lesson for me. The second thing about custodying assets, I would like to see the regulation get to the point where we have it in the brokerage industry. You know, there's some protections, there's some insurances, there's some cross-collateralization of other assets for a brokerage firm. But I would say this, there's something called SAB 121, and not to bore everybody with it, but it's basically preventing the big banks from custodying these assets. And I think we can figure out a way to remove that restriction. I think it would pave the way for lots of institutional investing, as lots more institutions would be comfortable holding this stuff. If they could hold it at JP Morgan Chase, or they could hold it at Bank of America, I think they'd be way more comfortable.
No, super insightful, and appreciate you sharing that. You just teased, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, so this is just fresh off the press, that you are about to publish a new book, The Little Book of Bitcoin, What You Need to Know that Wall Street has already figured out, and it has a foreword by none other than Michael Saylor. Could you give listeners a sense of what they can expect in the book? Could you share maybe what is a few things that Wall Street has figured out that people can look at or look forward to finding out more in the book?
Great question. So this is, again, about an odyssey. This is an odyssey story. How did I start out hating crypto, not understanding Bitcoin? What steps did I take in my personal odyssey to Bitcoin? And it's also academic, where I explain what Bitcoin's trying to do in terms of the network and the verification tools on the network and the open, full distribution of the network, this beautiful, transparently distributed, decentralized system. And then I talk about why Bitcoin's going to do well and why we think it's going to do well. And then I make some investment recommendations at the end. But it's a short book. It's a little book. That's why they call it the little book. And in it is a lot of insight about Bitcoin. Michael Saylor wrote the intro. I've interviewed lots of people, including Michael, for the book. It comes out on December the 5th. And you'll send me your address. I'll send you a copy of the book.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And look, this is probably going to be the best, the most cost-effective way to pick up investment advice from Anthony Scaramucci.
Right. No, listen, I mean, you pick up the book and buy Bitcoin, or you can spend the money that you were going to spend on the book on Bitcoin. One of the two.
Well, buy both.
or both.
Well, listen, thank you so much, Anthony. The last one is an easy one, although maybe not so much because you're so active. But where can our listeners stay up to date with Anthony Scaramucci? Your podcast, we'll put all the links and everything.
I'm available at Scaramucci on Twitter and Instagram. I also have a podcast called The Rest is Politics US. I do that with Caddy K. It's a fun podcast for me. And because I love books, as you can see from my office, I have a lot of books in here. I have a podcast called Open Book, where I interview authors. And so those are the fun things I like doing. I'm on TV right now pretty religiously because of what's going on in the campaign. And so I'm out there trying to explain to the best of my capability what's going on. And I really do appreciate you bringing me on, and I'll see you in Singapore.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And do not go download The Rest is Politics US. You'll get the insights or the real live track on what's happening in the elections from someone that's deeply in the campaign and knows both sides. The Tales, the crypto Tales from the Crypto podcast you recorded is an incredible, almost documentary style podcast. So I'll put all the links below. Thank you so much, Anthony. Look forward to seeing you in Singapore.
Okay, God bless. See you soon.
What a treat it is to be able to speak to someone like Anthony, who's been through so much and seen both sides of the aisle. Politics can be polarizing, and I know this because I saw it firsthand in Venezuela. When taken to the extreme, politicians can make you feel like you belong to one party rather than one country. and they cast the other side as the enemy. But no matter how you vote, we all share one country and we must coexist. In the upcoming US election, Bitcoin and crypto policy has been a divisive issue, with the media often portraying one party as pro-Bitcoin and the other party as anti-Bitcoin. And as a good Bitcoiner, I took it upon myself to not trust what I read, but to verify the facts, which is why I was so excited to speak with Anthony, a big-time proponent of the Democratic camp. He understands both Bitcoin and politics, and he knows what's at stake. His views may challenge mainstream narratives, but I'm sure that you found yourself nodding your head at parts of this interview. Whether you're red or blue, it's always important to understand where the other side is coming from. I hope that our conversations with David and Anthony gave you a better sense of the policies and platforms that both sides have proposed when it comes to Bitcoin. Regardless of the election outcome, we must strive for bipartisan support for Bitcoin. If you think the intersection of Bitcoin and politics will end after this election, you're mistaken. We're just getting started. As you can tell, season 3 of this pod has started with a bang, and it only gets better from here. I'll see you here back soon with another expert guest very, very soon. Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed this Because of Bitcoin episode, I would be very grateful for the 5 seconds it would take you to drop us a review and give us a rating on your favorite podcasting platform. This will really help us reach even more listeners. And if you'd like to learn more about Bitcoin, be sure to check out our newsletter by subscribing at letn.io. That's letn.io. Again, this was Mauricio Di Bartolomeo. Stay tuned for our next episode. And until then, muchas gracias y los quiero mucho. Ciao, ciao.